right, everybody. Hello. Today is Thursday, the 23rd of May. It happens to be a full moon in Sagittarius, and the ruler of the full moon is Jupiter, which is at the 29th degree of Taurus, conjunct Venus, and both of these planets are going to ingress into Gemini. And it's significant because Jupiter spends about 1 year in each sign, and so Jupiter switches signs about every year, and I've been the thing is about this is that I admittedly have been running into a certain problem, which is nothing new for me doing this channel. The problem is that this is considered to be a benefic transit, with the two benefics conjunct and Venus in relatively good dignity. However, I've been in kind of like a bit of a not the greatest mood recently, and I suppose on one hand there could be certain things to do with this where I have a I don't know where to get into that. At what point should I enter into this whole conversation? Because on one hand, I have a mental health diagnosis, which I've been trying to basically. I've like in my whole process of what I do with like journaling and like doing divination, where I'm like pulling tarot cards and I'm kind of like contemplating my situation, that I have this general sense that like my whole psychiatric history is something that is best to put behind me, right? Like put it in the past, because it was in 2011 and 2012 that I had like hospitalizations, and that I should like move on from that and all this kind of thing. But the truth is that in my day-to-day life, I mean, I did just go in yesterday for a medical treatment, but that it's not directly related to psychiatric things. But the fact is, like, I do like one of the things when I was being treated for psychiatric things was just saying that I had like a mood disorder, right? And that I just experienced these periods of like, I guess, melancholy or feeling upset with things or whatever. And I think like I took my training for being an astrologer from Adam Ellenboss, and I've been watching his videos, and he said that like when it comes to Jupiter and Venus and Uranus and Taurus, that you may not see results from it if you're not working for it, right? Like there could be a kind of like you get out of it what you put into it, and if you're not putting very much into it, you're not getting very much out of it, kind of thing. And I have to admit that I don't know if it's because of my psychiatric disability, or if it's because of my just my personality, but I don't consider myself to be a very hard worker. And I'm not a kind of guy who goes and like, tries to like optimize my health or tries to like really achieve a lot. So it could be that I'm not trying very hard and I'm not getting very much out of it, right? It could also be that, even when it came to Hellenistic astrology, that they said that when you're determining what kind of results that you're going to have, you have to look at the person, like you have to look at the context of the person you're reading a chart for and kind of understand who that person is, what kinds of things happen in this person's life, and like you're not going to, if somebody, I think, I think that this is what I'm trying to get into when it comes to like stuff like identity politics, right? You could look at me being just like an ordinary white male Canadian guy and read my chart based on that and project what is expected for your average white male Canadian dude in his 30s. But the thing is, when it comes to things like psychiatric disability, what tends to happen is that people around you tend to have a totally different set of expectations for you, right? Like, there was this, like, before being categorized as somebody who has a psychiatric disability, people have all these sort of, like, expectations of, like, how you're supposed to live, what you're supposed to be doing with your life, and also expectations of what would be normal to expect in terms of things happening in your life. And then after psychiatric disability, there's this tendency that people just don't have the same expectations, right? And that's because if you look at the statistics around this, especially when you're talking about things in the spectrum of like bipolar and schizophrenia, a lot of people who have these conditions aren't able to work, right? And if you put a lot of pressure on people to work when they're not able to, that's no good, right? So if you find yourself in a situation, at least with me, I find myself in a situation where when it comes to the people in my life, there's usually not very much pressure on me to do the things that people without this diagnosis do, right? And then also in that sense that the things that come out of my life, or whatever, the things that happen, are also, not the things, or they're a little bit different anyways, right? And one of the things that happened was ever since I got the psychiatric diagnosis, and my process of like friends and like having friends and making friends with people, that the friends that I had before I had a psychiatric diagnosis, well, I mean, either had already moved away and they were already distant, or else those friendships kind of dwindled out. And the people I ended up, like, there's a guy I met in a psych ward that I ended up hanging out with for a bit, or that there are people that, even if, like, I did this thing where I went to a Jungian men's group, and I made friends with a guy that I met there that had a similar kind of diagnosis. And it wasn't like we were meeting specifically because we joined some club of like people who had the same diagnosis, but you kind of gravitate towards people who are, well, whatever. You can maybe resonate with people, or you can relate to people, or whatever. And but there's this sort of issue that I find, or at least, I think there's maybe something that's coming out of this for me with the Jupiter, Uranus, and all this kind of stuff. Because, like, Jupiter is supposed to be, the thing about Jupiter is supposed to be about, like, growth and, like, abundance and all this kind of stuff, but Uranus is supposed to be, like, having something to do with freedom and these kinds of, like, revolutions and stuff like that. One thing that happened was that, like, I was hanging out with this guy for a number of years, or whatever, these people that I met, right, that had a similar diagnosis to me, and we'd hang out. And so, I have had friends over the years, but there's always certain things about it that have never been... It's always been difficult, because I think one of the things about psychiatric diagnosis is that people tend to be dealing with you without getting caught up in the medicalization of it. Like, people are dealing with a certain sense of suffering. The medical system tends to just make that into a chemical thing, right? That if you just give the people the right chemicals, they won't suffer anymore. But if you're actually spend time with these people could be very, very medicated and still be suffering, these people could be very medicated and still have problems, right? The medication, I mean, not to say that doesn't help for some people, but it's not going to just make all their problems go away just by, better living through chemistry, right? At one point in time, there was a girl that showed up that I ended up kind of getting into a relationship with, but it was a kind of a weird relationship, and I don't even know if I want to. It feels kind of weird. I mean, I ended up just living with this person, and it was kind of like. It was interesting, though, because it timed up with the ingress of, if you remember in 2018, that was when Uranus ingressed into Taurus. And it was interesting because prior to that, I was hanging out with this one guy a lot. And then the introduction of a girl into the situation really kind of disrupted that. And so there was the disruptive element of Uranus I associated with the introduction of that person, this relationship with a female in my life that displaced the relationship with my male friend. But there's also the kind of this thing that in this period of time there seemed to be really like not any development in terms of like making friends or forming connections with people that didn't have psychiatric diagnosis, that people that didn't have similar problems to me. And ultimately, the relationship or whatever I had going with that girlfriend or whatever, however you want to categorize it, didn't work out. And to be honest, part of the reason I don't know. I don't want I'm not supposed to like. It's good not to like abdicate the responsibility for your decision making on other people. But the truth be told is that when I got into a relationship with this girlfriend was the same time that I started studying astrology with Adam Ellenboss. And in the process of that, I started making friends or making connections with other astrologers. And part of me, around this time too, I was introduced to Deleuze and Guattari. And I hadn't, like, prior to, like, around 2017, or prior to the election of Donald Trump, I had no idea who Deleuze and Guattari were at all. They were completely outside my frame of reference. But Deleuze and Guattari have this idea about, like, a line of flight, right? And there's something about the trappings of mental health diagnosis. And even, like, they talk about in their books, they have two books that are in a series called Capitalism and Schizophrenia, and they talk about how people with schizophrenia tend to naturally inhabit this kind of line of flight, in the sense that, like, oftentimes when you get people who are diagnosed with bipolar or schizophrenia, they will deny it and say, I'm not this diagnosis. That doesn't make any sense. I'm something completely different. You can't put me in a box. You can't label me. You can't control me. And so you're running away from the establishment on a line of flight towards some kind of deviation, which is, I think there's something about Uranus which kind of embraces this kind of line of flight thing. But there's also this kind of thing where it's like, I don't know if it's better for me to identify with having, either some sort of bipolar, schizoaffective, schizophrenia thing, or if it's better to just put that behind me and move on. But there's part of my desire for getting into astrology in the first place was that it was an opportunity for me to make friends and to make connections, or to put myself into a certain a certain position that wasn't based on a medicalization of a problem, or that wasn't based on like suffering. That I'm I'm suffering, and so I'm going to have a bunch of other friends who are also suffering in the same way, and then all my interrelationships that I have with other people are based on this dynamic of being wanting to have whatever people want to have. You want to have a good time, and you want to have like be able to socialize with people, and you don't want to just have all of that just fall apart because everybody's just a wreck and everybody's thinks their lives are going to shit, or everybody's imploding in like you want to like. So this is the kind of thing that like maybe by moving away from being all focused on the mental health stuff and moving in the direction of astrology and making friends, and it could also be like that. But unfortunately, what seemed to happen was that like during the time when I was first learning astrology, I basically did a lot of charts for free for the sake of learning astrology and practicing the process of doing natal chart readings for people. But a lot of the people that I was doing these charts for were people that I had met online through these networks of people with different kinds of mental health problems, people are interested in more alternative approaches to mental health and stuff like this. And so I had a lot, and then eventually I had some paid clients who were paying me to do work. But well, the thing is, like, I have never really been able to break into the market of people who are just like non-diagnosed, or like people who were like outside this whole thing about like mental health and radical mental health. Like the goal was to be like to sort of transition out of that, to set myself up as being an astrologer that would basically provide my services to all kinds of people, whether they had problems or not. But there's something that's been very stubborn about this categorization of somebody with like mental health diagnosis, that like I really have not been able to transition out of that. I've really not been able to set myself up as somebody who just does as just an astrologer and not somebody who has mental health problems, or somebody who's doing a lot of astrology work for clients that are well-to-do members of society and not people who are suffering from schizophrenia or whatever, right? So it's like, but like I still, when I do my divination work, it still sort of like lends me to this direction that it is probably better for me to move on from this sort of like limiting sort of way of categorizing myself, and it's better to like move, to move away from that, right? But here I am starting this video talking about it, so I don't know if I'm really moving away from it at all, if I'm just, I mean, I guess I have to start from where I'm at. I have to start from the situation I'm in, right? But it's not to say that there's also this whole thing that happened with COVID, where it's like I started to make astrology videos around the time COVID started, and when I started making astrology videos, there was this problem that was like, there were certain people that were saying like, is there any point to doing astrology now that COVID's here? Because COVID had this effect of basically just putting the brakes on a whole bunch of stuff. There's all these sort of things that were developing that were just sort of like shut down by COVID or interrupted by COVID. And I was living in Nanaimo, and I was sort of like, I don't know, like, there was a certain line of development or line of progress that I was in, and like I said, I don't want to like, I'll take responsibility for my own decisions, but as I was starting to get involved with astrologers, I hired an astrologer to talk about this kind of stuff, and the astrologer advised me to break up with my girlfriend, and to I don't know, it didn't really. I ended up breaking it with my girlfriend, losing the place that I was living, moving back in with my family, having a physical health crisis, and that's why yesterday it's been nearly 3 years now that I've been on this medication. But this is the whole thing about Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus leading into Jupiter in Gemini, is that Taurus has this thing about being a fixed sign that tends to just sort of like be kind of slow sometimes Taurus can be a little bit like lazy, or like it's like that Taurus season. If you notice Taurus season in the springtime, I feel like there's this kind of like slowing down where the weather gets warmer and you just kind of like take it easy a bit more, compared to Aries where there's more of the sense of a push of activity, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there's this kind of issue that I've been running into with these kinds of factors, with COVID interrupting the situation that I was in, and having this. I mean, I'll take responsibility for myself about breaking up with the girlfriend, and part of the reason why I broke up with the girlfriend was that, and I think it relates to what I wanted to get into with Jupiter conjunct Venus, and then the influence of Uranus and Taurus, has been the idea of like freedom in relationships. And I mean, you could also apply that to friendships as well, which was like, when I first met that girlfriend, she disrupted this friendship that I had going. But prior to that disruption, I was feeling kind of like, like this. When you feel this like social obligation, or like you start to be like, it's this uncomfortable thing where you're like, you're starting to feel pressure to do things to fulfill some sort of social obligation of being some person's friend, but not really because you want to do it. Or that you're somehow just like locked into this thing that is not really doing much for you, but you're supportive to somebody, or like you're somebody who's suffering has you there as like some kind of a support, but it's not really like, this is the thing that's coming through for me anyways with the recent conjunction, is that like I remember talking to somebody at one point in time and telling them about like how I had some kind of like, I think it's from a therapeutic perspective maybe, that like, or like when you're doing things with like, you're holding space in a therapeutic setting or something like that, that you're like, there are all these people who are suffering, and it's like you have to open your heart to the suffering of others. And rather than pushing those people away or trying to protect yourself from other people's suffering, you're supposed to just be able to like really open your heart to all the pain and suffering in the world. And like through that heartbreak, there's some kind of transformation or something like that. But there's something about what's coming through. I don't know, at least what seems to be coming through for me is that like, that could just be a kind of like a delusion. Or that like maybe there's this kind of like freedom. There's this kind of freedom in relationship where you don't actually have to do that. Or that like there's been some force that's been like the whole time. Like I had this idea that I was going to like create, like I was hosting for a while these like online support groups for people we were talking about like, rather than using medical language, I was going in this direction of spiritual emergency, right? Doing online support groups for spiritual emergency. And I think it was out of that context of being a support group facilitator that was just like, I just have to like open my heart and feel the pain and suffering of all these people, and just like, it's almost like a kind of a martyrdom kind of thing, right? But like this sort of like realization that I don't have to do, like, first, I don't have to do that, and it may not be healthy, and it may be better to just free myself out of that dynamic and not do that stuff in the first place, right? And one of the things, like, I remember the guy who actually started the support group, in some conversation I had with him, he was saying that, like, instead of making it about trying to, like, save other people, maybe the best I could do would be to like save myself, right? Rather than all these other people who are making these problems in their lives and messing things up, and I have to go in there with my bleeding heart and just feel really bad for all these people who've really fucked things up, and like and just like cripple myself in a state of empathy for all these other people and their problems. Like, maybe it's better to just be free from those dynamics and not get involved in the first place, right? I mean, however, that seems to lend to a point of me being isolated, not having any community, not having any friends. But the thing is, if your friends are just a bunch of schizophrenics who are fucking up their lives and alienating people, and basically or people who basically put you in a position where they are in the midst of either an existential crisis, or R.D. Laing talked about this idea of ontological security, right? Your sense of security of your being, of your person. And if you're people who are basically unable to hold a job, unable to do their executive functioning is basically fucked, and they are experiencing a state of insecurity, if they're experiencing a state of vulnerability, and experiencing a state of panic, I guess you could say, and alarm or whatever, and are freaking out, that I think community maybe is a good idea, but there's something about, like, if you are in these dynamics as a person who is supposed to be a kind of a stopgap, right? Like, these people have alienated all their friends, are basically a destructive force that is like in self-destruct mode, and you're supposed to be there to be a stopgap, to provide some sort of sense of security, to provide some sort of emotional support or something. But they're just gonna fucking rip right through you. They're just gonna they're creating what Deleuze and Guattari call a black hole scenario. And what you don't want, like Deleuze and Guattari have this idea of the black hole and the four-eyed machine, right? Is that if you have this wounded child or this black hole, this sort of like, you have this howling void that you want to fill with love and connection and relationships, and somebody else has this howling void that they need to fill with some sort of security or love and relationships. What you don't want to do is to just be like, have like two black holes that create some sort of like force of antimatter that just, this force of destruction that sucks all sorts of, that just damages everything around it, and is a chaotic force that out of control, right? But so it's like, maybe better, rather than to feed into those dynamics, to free yourself out of them, right? And so this is what I've always kind of thought about when you put Uranus together with Jupiter and Venus, rather than being this is a time for like growth and expansion in relationships, like maybe there is some wisdom to the archetype of the runaway bride, right? That you don't want to get, your freedom from these shitty relationship dynamics where people have some kind of wound that's never going to heal, that they're just going to be acting from this place of insecurity. And the problem too is that there are people with these, I don't want to like discriminate or give into mental health stigma, but there are people who, in situations where there's not really like a tangible, I don't know, maybe there are problems, right? Maybe there are real problems, but there are people who will just, in a situation where things could be going smoothly, people will just create problems when you don't need to have problems, right? People will just take a situation that could just be going smooth and then just be like, use it as a way to just mess everything up. And the whole thing is, you need to be able to, like, I think you need to be able to see what, it sucks though, because then it creates this sort of thing where these people who are like this end up living in a situation where they are extremely isolated, extremely atomized, right? Because they're basically treated like it's basically mirroring what the community is like, right? Because it's like, if if you are like, it's probably like you're in this thing where you hate yourself. You're in the state of extreme self-loathing and self-hatred because everybody treats you as if you are just like a destructive force. Like anything that you touch you're gonna fuck it up. So you just have to live a lonely, isolated life, and people have to keep 30 meters back. Everybody avoid this person because they're just gonna fuck everything up. But the thing is, the truth is that if you actually look at what these people are like, often case it is true, right? But the thing is, I think the best thing, like what you don't want to do is basically create a category where it's like, because all these people are isolated and don't have any friends or don't have any community, that they just get together and form their own community, because then you just have a bunch of people are, well, it hasn't worked out very well in my case anyways. And so like I'm just, maybe the problem is because I haven't been working hard enough. Maybe if I just went and worked out at the gym every day and I got a job and I just worked really hard, and then I would just fucking like, pump the iron, move the fucking units, sell the fucking product in the fucking store, make lots of money, then everybody would like me because I would have security and they would see me as a kind of person who would be, a supportive person to be around, right? And then the point is that like, if in a transit where like, the only people who want to talk to you are people who basically fuck up their lives and alienate everyone around them, maybe it's better to just be free from that and basically give people the permission that if I have some kind of like wound, or if I have some sort of existential crisis, that I'm not putting that on any other person, right? I'm not looking for somebody in relationship to fill that gap for me. That my own suffering is my responsibility, and I'm not putting that on anybody else to hold my hand, to comfort me, to give me emotional support. And instead I can take responsibility for myself, and basically my approach has been to, you can see that there's all these people who try, rather than trying to build the successful life where you have, everything, what we all want. Like the Gang of Four song, you put yourself, you rather than trying to just put all the problems behind you and live the actualized ideal life where you have what we all want: a wife, a kids, a career, a family, all the good things, to just basically be like, I'm instead of trying to build all that up, just to not cause a problem for people, right? Not cause any problems for people, not feel like you have to be there's a guy who self-immolated himself for like no good reason, right? Or, not to be that guy, and just to live like a quiet life and not demand so much out of life, and be thankful for what you've got, if people want to be your friends, they're free to be your friends or not to be your friends. And you don't have to be under any obligation. Like, and this is the thing, is that I don't want to, like, there's something I've been avoiding talking about this on this channel, but there is a certain friend of mine, another one of these guys that had, the guy that I met in the hospital, right? The guy who I met in the hospital and made friends with back when I was hospitalized in 2011, a long time ago now, that I'm free not to be this guy's friend. I'm free no, I don't have any obligation to be friends with anybody I don't want to be. And yet last year, this guy was sending me messages on social media being really upset that I didn't want to be his friend, right? And I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna read out these messages, but like, this the whole thing is that I have to admit that, I still maybe have a mood disorder because there'll be days and weeks, or maybe days or weeks or whatever go by where I just feel awful, right? And I think, maybe if I had a community, maybe I had people to socialize with or something like that, maybe that's what my desire is like. But the thing is, there's people, I have the right not to be friends with people if I don't want to be friends with people. And I think it's better to basically free people from the obligation that I'm unhappy and it's your job to make me happy. To basically free people from that expectation, free people from that obligation. And yeah, I don't know. And I mean, I also just have to admit that there's something going on with I'm wanting to break out of the identity of or involvement with psychiatry and radical mental health and all this kind of stuff, because it's sort of like, if I'm an isolated person and the only people that I'm friends with are people who are basically like fucking in a dive bomb kamikaze attack on their own lives, that are basically just fucking, I don't want to be friends with a bunch of people who are like self-immolating themselves, right? I want to be like, this is the kind of thing, it's like, maybe it would, like, instead of taking all the craziest fucking people and concentrating them so that they only hang out with other really fucking crazy, like, let's get all the self-destructive people and just put them together, right? Like, maybe it would help to have some well-balanced people, like, or some people that were more functional, or people that have a variety, right? Like, this is why I think maybe Jupiter into Gemini might be good for variety, diversity, that you can have, like, that you could have friends that are different from you, right? That, like, maybe you're a guy who is like a carpenter. Maybe you go and you build stuff with wood, and you use power tools, and you like, or you're a carpenter, or whatever, you do drywall and you build houses. Maybe it's possible that you could be friends with people that work other kinds of jobs, that you could be friends with people who don't do that, right? And then you could have a community of people who are not just based on like propping up what your identity is, right? You can have people that are like, whoa, isn't it cool? I was hanging with this guy who's completely different than me. Whoa, and that could be something that's cool that could happen from Jupiter into Gemini, right? And so in the same way, like, you could be somebody who had bipolar and schizophrenia and be like, wow, isn't it cool that I can hang out with all these people and they're not just a bunch of fucking I have such a wide range of friends. They're not just a bunch of schizos who want to kill themselves. So I don't have to just be like, my whole social life is just being a fucking sponge for everybody's pain and suffering, right? Like, I could have a variety of friends, right? Like, wouldn't that be cool? But no, we have to be completely fucking socially isolated, and we have to just be this thing where I have to just go and work really hard to be an individual man, and then I have to have and this is the whole thing about Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus, is at one point in time, the whole getting married thing, that women were treated as property, right? Women didn't have any rights of their own. They were just treated as property, right? And so there's also this kind of thing that, if you were somebody who had a disability back then, do you think that you had the rights of a citizen to just do whatever you wanted? No, probably not. You were probably just a kind of a liability, or you were treated as an object that people just have to you're under the ownership of your family. You can't really do what you want, right? And then in the same, I don't know, maybe I'm getting too worked up about this now, but this is what there's some kind of basically from my perspective, there has been Jupiter, Uranus, Venus in Taurus, and it has been, since Uranus has been in this sign, it's been disruptive. It is when Uranus in Taurus has introduced people into my lives, they've disrupted things, they've shaken things up. It's been like playing pool, where one pool ball knocks another pool ball out of position, right? And things kind of get jangled, but it hasn't been to create a solid, lasting structure, but basically displace things which probably didn't need to be there in the first place, or to give me a different perspective. But basically being like that, if you do things because the word friend, right? Friendship is related to the word freedom, right? You're not friends with somebody because it's some duty or obligation to be friends with people. You're friends with people because it's your choice out of your own free will to be friends or not to be friends. And there's some liberating thing about Uranus that has been like, the teaching of Uranus has been like, to embrace your own freedom, that you're not obligated, you're not bound, you're not tied down into these dynamics, and it may be better to move on from them, right? And now, but the thing is, what's interesting now is that Jupiter, and we're going to have this separation from Jupiter and Uranus, which, I mean, there's this whole thing where Jupiter and Uranus has stood for, this sort of rebellious thing. We've had a lot of protests going on about the Israeli war or occupation of Palestine. And, this is kind of interesting, is because now that Jupiter is going to Gemini, the Jupiter and Uranus are going to separate. So if anything, we're going to see less of this. We're going to see less of these protests. We're going to see less of this rebellious, revolutionary kind of attitude. And, if you were going to do any rebelling, or if you were going to make any changes or shake things up, basically, this last year has been your chance to do that. Now we're going to there's going to be a different dynamic where Jupiter and Uranus are not going to be so closely aligned. There's not going to be this revolutionary breaking free and liberating. It's going to be a bit of a different dynamic, because Jupiter is going to be squaring Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, and it might be a bit, maybe I'll get into that in another video, right? But I basically wanted to use this video. I'm basically looking back on the dynamic that Jupiter and Venus have had with Uranus and Taurus, and, concluding this chapter that has been going on for about a year, which has been, for me, it's been characterized by the freedom of having obligations to be caught in these relationship dynamics that is basically you're trying to fill the void for some other person, or you're trying to be a stopgap for the other person's suffering, or the other person's insecurity, or the other person's existential crisis, and just being free. Like, you don't have to do that. And so, and it hasn't been a time where I've had a lot of social contact. It's been a time where I've basically just been reading books and like doing book clubs online and stuff like that, and basically just living at my mom's house. And there is this issue though about, like, I'm not a person who's overly happy or satisfied in my situation. And, there's been times when when Jupiter and Uranus were conjunct 12 years ago, I went to Australia, or maybe, it's not even 12 years ago, it's longer than that now, right? But more like 14 years ago, right? But there's certain things where I'm not doing that because I'm caught up with this medication thing where I can't just go traveling, right? But if I wanted to, I actually have a bit of money. Like, I could go backpacking, I could go traveling. The world is my oyster, right? I have this freedom to do what I want, right? But instead, I've just been spending this time sitting around at home at my mom's house reading books and avoiding these dynamics that I don't want to be in. And there might be people that contact me that are people that I've met through this radical mental health scene, and people who've really done a good job of fucking up their own lives and basically creating a bad reputation for themselves. Like, these are a bunch of people that are just going to stress you out and create drama, and that basically my family will be like, Dan, don't hang out with these people. So the people that do, it's basically I have to be isolated because the people that do want to hang out with me are people that are going to be bad influences on me, right? And then the people who are going to be good influences on me, who the hell knows who they are? I have no idea who they are, if anybody knows any of these people, maybe, or it just doesn't work that way, apparently. I don't, people who are good influences don't show up out of the blue. It's only people that are there to tempt you with addictions and bad habits and self-destructive escapist patterns or whatever, right? Which are no good. So, and I have to admit that, this is the problem. It is an issue with astrology. That maybe astrology isn't, maybe I don't know. People are encouraging me to keep going with my astrology channel, and my astrology channel is doing better than any of my other efforts on the internet. So I'm going to keep going with it. But the problem with astrology is that there are, with the benefics and the malefics, the benefics tend to trouble me more than the malefics, because with Jupiter there's this sense of entitlement. There's this sort of expecting some good thing to happen and being frustrated that the good thing isn't happening, or this kind of idea that you have to work, that God helps those who helps themselves kind of thing, right? That you're not going to get anything for free, you have to work for it. And I have to admit, it could be because of my disability. Could be that I'm just not, I'm not a very hard worker. So if that's how it works, that if you have to, if you only get what you work for, admittedly, I'm not working very hard, right? I'm not even, I'm just sitting on my ass and reading intellectual philosophy books. And there's something about this where it does actually take certain work to understand certain philosophy, I am getting a kind of a reward where things that I really didn't understand before. I look back at myself when I was in my 20s, and I feel like I was a total idiot, right? I feel like I was a moron, basically. And I'm at least, out of the work that I put into literature and reading and trying to develop my mind, I'm kind of wow, I have a completely different perspective now that I didn't have when I was in my 20s, right? And so in that sense, I'm appreciative and grateful for having this opportunity to do this. However, in terms of it creating a kind of a payoff, it's one of those, it's what they say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? There's the guys who do, there are people who are the experts in this area, who are, I was listening to this podcast from the guy who does, what's it called? I mean, I didn't listen to the whole episode, but there's this one part of this, the Machine Unconscious Happy Hour, where the guy was, talking about how his, he was telling his wife about, he was excited about this new podcast episode they were doing, because they're having some sort of guest on, but his wife, doesn't know anything, his wife doesn't know anything about the philosophy that he does. That it could be just basically Greek to her, right? And this whole thing of, when it comes to, I don't know, having relationships and friendships and stuff like that, by getting into some really difficult, obscure philosophy, it's probably not the thing that's going to lead you into having a lot of just or it's not something you're going to just talk about with average everyday people, that it's going to open up all these opportunities to connect with just general folks in your neighborhood, or that you're gonna go on dates and you're gonna meet people, have relationships with women who are gonna, oh yeah, I've read all these books, I know all of, I mean, the people, not to say that there aren't people out there, but it's the tendency to go in this direction. It's just going to take you in a direction where you're going to be more and more isolated, and you're going to feel, and the friends that in my case, it has this effect that the friends that I used to have, particularly the guy that I met on the psych ward, basically resents and hates me because he thinks that I am, like, I don't like him because I think he's stupid and I read all these intelligent books and I sit on my ivory tower of intellectual superiority and look down on him and I'm so smart and everything, and I'm too cool to hang out with him, right? But the thing is, it's like, maybe there's some truth to that. I don't know where I'm going with it. But the point I'm saying is that I don't, the stuff that I like, that I don't think it necessarily is going to help me connect me with friends and with other people and that kind of thing, right? It tends just to continue, but like that, your obligation to be connected to these people, when it's not what kind of people are these? Are these people that are really good influences on your life? Not all the time, right? They may not, the point is that, like, it may be better to free yourself from those situations, right? To free yourself from those dynamics. And there's a certain, like, that's the whole thing about the Enlightenment, was a kind of a liberation, mind over matter, or like being able to see that you have no obligation to do that in the first place. Or that also to see that, like, why, I don't know, like, why there, like, I remember when I was in high school, like, when you go to, like, parties when you're a teenager or something like that, and you drink too much or whatever, most of the time is I'm drinking too much because I didn't, like, it's a situation I don't want to be in, right? And you're just trying to drink to, like, cope with it. Like, there's nothing here that's like, I don't want to be in this situation. I want to be here, right? I want to be in a situation where I can, instead of getting drunk to medicate, to mediate the suffering, I want to stay sober, so my mind is clear, my mind is sharp, and then I can put that to learning and reading and developing myself. And unfortunately, if you want to have friends, it's like the whole thing, like people who party and do cocaine and stuff like that. If you want to have friends, just doing lots of coke and partying is a great way to make lots of friends. It's not necessarily healthy for you. No, it's not necessarily a good idea, right? But I mean, it's a good way to socialize, right? So, but this is the whole thing. It's like, I'm making the conscious choice that I don't want to get out, like, I don't want to hang out with a bunch of people who do drugs to fill the void, or to surround themselves with a bunch of losers to comfort them. It's better to rise above that, basically, right? But I have to admit, it's not necessary. Like, if you want to be happy, like, reading philosophy isn't like reading self-help books, right? You might want to stick to if you want to be happy, might want to stick to the self-help books, right? You might not want to just be like an unhappy person reading a lot of philosophy, because you end up like Schopenhauer or something, right? Whatever. I don't know if this is a good video or not, but like I said, I have been in not a very good mood. I have, according to the psychiatrists that I saw over a decade ago, apparently I have a mood disorder. Apparently if you have schizophrenia, I may not be putting the work into this stuff. I may not be seeing the results because I don't put the work in, right? But if you have, according to the psychiatrists, your inability to put the work in is part of your diagnosis, right? So my inability to do this work, to see the results, where I have a community of people who aren't just a bunch of, like, fuck-ups, I don't know how to do that. I haven't figured it out yet, right? And I'm frustrated. I'm like, or like maybe the community of people who aren't fuck-ups, maybe that's not for me. Maybe that's for somebody else, right? Maybe that's somebody else's community. Maybe I'm not under that obligation to be part of that, right? Maybe it doesn't matter. All right, thanks for watching. I don't know if maybe this isn't a good video. Maybe I'm being too Maybe I'm just expressing bad emotions. I don't know. I guess if I regret it, I could take this one down. I think I'm gonna put it up anyways, though. But this is basically where I'm at for this transit. Thanks for watching.